Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most fascinating and honestly complex challenges in all of science and medicine. We are talking about diagnosing the human mind. It is a field absolutely filled with brilliant insights, but also constant, intense debate. And we're going to unpack exactly how professionals make sense of the wild myriad of psychological symptoms that humans experience.
Think about it for a second. If you break your arm, an X-ray shows the fracture, right? If you have an infection, a quick blood panel confirms it for sure. But as of right now, there is absolutely no biological test available to diagnose any type of mental abnormality. None. Mental disorders aren't singular diseases with a common pathology that we can just slide under a microscope. Instead, they're highly complex collections of cognitive, emotional, and social problems. When we say someone has schizophrenia, for example, we're actually describing a specific collection of problems in rational thinking and emotional regulation, rather than one single underlying disease process.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We'll hit the diagnosis dilemma, why we classify, the dangers of labeling, a comparison of the DSM-5-TR and the ICD-11, categories versus dimensions, and finally, the imperfect necessity.
Section 1. The Diagnosis Dilemma, Defining the Core Issue.
You know, this isn't a new problem at all. Fundamentally, a classification system is just a set of syndromes and the rules for identifying them. And we've been trying to do this since the 4th century BCE. That's when Hippocrates divided all mental disorders into just 4 categories: mania, melancholia, paranoia, and epilepsy. It wasn't actually until 1883 that Emil Kraepelin published the very first modern classification system, which really laid the groundwork for the incredibly detailed manuals we use today. Section 2. Why we classify. The advantages.
Now, you might be wondering, if diagnosing the mind is so incredibly subjective, why do we even bother writing these massive diagnostic rulebooks in the first place? Well, the advantages are actually profound. The primary role of these systems is to organize a wildly confusing array of symptoms in an agreed-upon manner. It basically acts as a common language. If a researcher at a university in one state is studying obsessive-compulsive disorder and a clinician in another state is treating it, standardization ensures they are talking about the exact same thing. It speeds up research into causes and treatments, and for you, our loved one, it means managed care systems can actually provide coordinated, long-term support based on standardized data.
Section 3. The dangers of labeling. Disadvantages and critiques. While these rulebooks are absolutely vital tools, placing medical labels on the human mind carries some very real and heavy disadvantages. It's important we objectively examine the critiques here. For instance, the influential psychiatrist Thomas Szasz famously argued that the diagnostic system is inherently biased. He proposed that people in power use psychiatric diagnoses to label and isolate individuals who just do not fit in with society's expectations. He suggested that what we sometimes call mental disorders might just be alternative ways of behaving and looking at the world that society simply refuses to accept. And beyond the social critiques, there's a major psychological danger known as reification. Once a diagnosis is defined, people tend to reify it, meaning they start seeing the diagnosis as a real, tangible thing rather than just a set of clinical judgments about how symptoms tend to group together. This is dangerous, right? Because an individual might start to view themselves entirely through the lens of their disorder, taking on a disordered role they carry for the rest of their lives. This was famously highlighted by David Rosenhan's Sanity study, which demonstrated exactly how clinicians and the public alike can permanently label people based on past diagnoses, even when they no longer show any symptoms at all.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4. DSM-5-TR versus ICD-11, the two heavyweights.
Now, what's really interesting about this is looking at the two major global systems designed to navigate these exact pros and cons. In one corner, represented by the American Psychiatric Association, we have the foundation for the DSM. In the other, we have the World Health Organization's ICD-11. These two organizations have distinct approaches, but they share an overarching goal of harmonizing the classification of mental health. Breaking this down, the DSM-5-TR is developed by the American Psychiatric Association and is used primarily in the United States, focusing exclusively on mental disorders. The ICD-11, on the flip side, is developed by the World Health Organization. It's implemented by global member states and is a fundamental framework that encompasses all medical diseases and health conditions. This means it actually integrates mental health right into the broader landscape of all human health. Looking closely at the DSM, its 5th edition made a massive evolutionary leap. It completely dropped its old multi-axial system. So instead of splitting diagnoses across different axes, the DSM-5 integrates them into a single diagnostic scheme with separate notations for important psychosocial factors. The whole goal here was to consider an individual's functional status entirely separately from their symptom status.
Conversely, the ICD-11 introduces what's called the Clinical Descriptions and Diagnostic Requirements, or CDDR. The guiding principles here are clinical utility and global applicability. Because it has to work across vast cultural lines, the ICD-11 intentionally avoids artificially precise symptom cutoffs or strict duration requirements. This gives clinicians all around the world the necessary flexibility to exercise clinical judgment based on the specific context of the patient sitting right in front of them.
Section 5. Categories versus dimensions. Evolving the rulebooks.
This brings us to a fascinating philosophical shift happening right now inside the pages of both of these manuals regarding how we measure sickness. Historically, both manuals relied heavily on a categorical approach. This is a rigid yes or no threshold that defines exactly where normality ends and psychopathology begins. And hey, it's incredibly useful for a busy clinician who needs to make hundreds of decisions a day. However, both manuals are increasingly incorporating a dimensional approach. This views mental health on a continuum, or sliding scale of severity, like mild, moderate, or severe. It doesn't assume clear boundaries, which, frankly, better reflects the real-world fluidity of human behavior.
And this brilliantly illustrates why that shift is happening. Think about comorbidity. That's when an individual meets the criteria for multiple disorders at the exact same time. Because symptoms like irritability or disrupted sleep overlap across depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and more, a rigid categorical system struggles to neatly separate them. A dimensional approach recognizes that these overlapping symptoms reflect fundamental cognitive and emotional problems that cut across multiple diagnoses. It just provides a scientifically more accurate picture.
Section 6. The imperfect necessity.
Let's synthesize exactly what all of this means for the reality of clinical practice today. The crucial point is that we just have to navigate this inherent fuzziness. These diagnostic criteria require subjective clinical judgment, especially when mental health intersects with the legal system, where a medical label doesn't neatly translate to a legal standard of capability. Clinicians are really encouraged to acknowledge that subjectivity and utilize cross-cutting symptom measures. These are tools designed to look beyond a prototypical diagnosis to capture the nuances of a patient's overall well-being. And above all, we literally must continually revise these systems as our empirical science improves. Which leaves us with a final question to reflect on. How do we balance the undeniable medical necessity of diagnosis, which secures treatment, funding, and standardized care, with the profound human cost of being labeled? It's a huge tension at the very heart of modern psychiatry, reminding us that while our tools are imperfect, the ultimate goal is always to better understand and alleviate human suffering. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what you read.